Sounds like a name of a song right there. Turn on the lights in Derry.
Turn them off. We can't afford the energy bills any longer. Haven't you heard?
Okay.
We'll just have one candle between the lot of us.
All right. So a little brief introduction for anyone who might watch this video later. We are beginning again at the beginning of Ulysses. So there we go. Are you raising a toast there, Mr. Kennedy? I
Yeah,
toast.
just to new beginnings. Happy New Year to everyone. And
There we,
as I'll just echo Duncan's sentiments, kinder, more loving, gentler, happier, healthier,
there
more
you go.
prosperous.
There
And
we go.
Sláinte. Sláinte.
All right. With that toast, we shall begin. So let me make sure. Susan, do you see the chat list? Okay. So you'll be reading after Bill Kennedy. Bill, raise your hand and make sure Susan knows who you are. All right. Here we go. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead, bearing a bowl of ladder on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. The yellow dressing gown, ungirdled, was sustained gently behind him by the mild morning air. He held the bowl aloft and intoned, In troibo ad altare diem. Halted, he peered down the dark winding stairs and called up coarsely, Come up, Kench! Come up, you fearful Jesuit! Solemnly he came forward and mounted the round gun rest. He faced about and blessed gravely thrice the tower, the surrounding country, and the awakening mountains. Then, catching sight of Stephen Dedalus, he bent towards him and made rapid crosses in the air, gurgling in his throat and shaking his head. Stephen Dedalus, displeased and sleepy, leaned his arms on top of the staircase and looked coldly at the shaking, girdling face that blessed him, equine in its length, and at the light, untonsured hair, grained and hued like pale oak. Buck Mulligan peeped an instant under the mirror and then covered the bowl smartly. Back to barracks, he said sternly. He added in the preacher's tone, For this, so dearly beloved, is the genuine Christine, body and soul and blood and owns. Slow music, please. Close your eyes, gents. One moment. A little trouble about those white corpuscles. Silence, all. Next reader.
He peered sideways up and gave a long, low whistle of call, then paused a while in rapt attention, his even white teeth glistening here and there with gold points. Chrysostomos. Two strong, shrill whistles answered through the calm. Thanks, old chap, he cried briskly. That will do nicely. Switch off the current, will you? He skipped off the gun rest and looked gravely at his watcher, gathering about his legs the loose folds of his gown. The plump shadowed face and sullen oval jowl recalled a prelate, patron of arts in the Middle Ages. A pleasant smile broke quietly over his lips. The mockery of it, he said gaily. Your absurd name, an ancient Greek. He pointed his finger in friendly jest and went over to the parapet, laughing to himself. Stephen Dedalus stepped up, followed him wearily halfway, and sat down on the edge of the gun rest, watching him still as he propped his mirror on the parapet, dipped the brush in the bowl, and lathered cheeks and neck. Buck Mulligan's gay voice went on. My name is absurd too, Malachi Mulligan, two dactyls, but it has the Hellenic ring, hasn't it? Tripping and funny like the Buck himself. We must go to Athens. Will you come if I can get the aunt to fork out 20 quid? Next, please.
he laid the brush aside and, laughing with delight, cried, Will he come, the jejune Jesuit? Ceasing, he began to shave with care. Tell me, Mulligan, Stephen said quietly. Yes, my love? How long is Haynes going to stay in this tower? Buck Mulligan showed a shaven cheek over his right shoulder. God, isn't he dreadful? He said frankly. Ponderous Saxon. He thinks you're not a gentleman. God, those bloody English, bursting with money and indigestion, because he comes from Oxford. You know, Douglas, you have the real Oxford manner. He can't make you out. Oh, my name for you is the best. Kinch, the knife blade. He shaved warily over his chin. He was raving all night about a Black Panther, Stephen said. Where is the gun case? A woeful lunatic, Mulligan said. Were you in a funk? I was, Stephen said with energy and growing fear. Out here in the dark with a man I don't know, raving and moaning to himself about shooting a Black Panther. You saved men from drowning. I'm not a hero, however. If he stays on here, I am off. Buck Mulligan frowned at the lather on his razor blade. He hopped down from his perch and began to search his trouser pockets hastily. Scutter, he cried thickly. He came over to the gun rest and, thrusting a hand into Stephen's upper pocket, said, Lend us a loan of your snot rag to wipe my razor. Stephen suffered him to pull out and hold up on show by its corner a dirty, crumpled handkerchief. Buck Mulligan wiped the razor blade neatly. Then, gazing over the handkerchief, he said, The bard's nose rag, a new art color for our Irish poets, snot green. You can almost taste it, can't you? He mounted to the parapet again and gazed out over Dublin Bay, his fair oak-pale hair stirring lightly. God, he said quietly, isn't the sea what Algy calls it? A grey, sweet mother. The snot-green sea, the scrotum-tightening sea. Epi, oh, in opa ponton. Oh, Douglas, the Greeks. I must teach you. You must read them in the original. Thalata, Thalata. She is our great sweet mother. Come and look. Stephen stood up and went over to the parapet. Leaning on it, he looked down on the water and on the mailboat clearing the harbor mouth of Kingston. Our mighty mother, Buck Mulligan said. Next, please.
He turned abruptly his gray, searching eyes from the sea to Stephen's face. The aunt thinks you killed your mother, he said. That's why she won't let me have anything to do with you. Someone killed her, Stephen said gloomily. You should have knelt down, damn it, Kinch, when your dying mother asked you, Buck Mulligan said. I'm Hyperborean as much as you, but to think of your mother begging you with her last breath to kneel down and pray for her, and you refused. There's something sinister in you. He broke off and lathered again, lightly, his farther cheek. A tolerant smile curled his lips. But a lovely mummer, he murmured to himself. Kinch, the loveliest mummer of them all. He shaved evenly and with care in silence, seriously. Stephen, an elbow rested on the jagged granite, leaned his palm against his brow and gazed at the fraying edge of his shiny black coat sleeve. Pain that was not yet the pain of love fretted his heart. Silently, in a dream, she had come to him after her death, her wasted body within its loose brown grave clothes, giving off an odor of wax and rosewood. Her breath that had been bent upon him, mute, reproachful, a faint odor of wetted ashes. Across the threadbare cuffledge, he saw the sea hailed as a great sweet mother by the well-fed voice beside him. The ring of bay and skyline held a dull green mass of liquid. A bowl of white china had stood beside her deathbed, holding the green, sluggish bile which she had torn up from her rotting liver by fits of loud, groaning vomiting. Buck Mulligan wiped again his razor blade. "Ah, poor dog's body," he said in a kind voice. "I must give you a shirt and a few nose rags. How are the second-hand breeks?" "They fit well enough," Stephen answered. Buck Mulligan attacked the hollow beneath his underlip. "The mockery of it," he said contentedly. "Seconding they should be, God knows. What poxy bowsy left them off? I have a lovely pair with a hair stripe gray. You'll look spiffing in them. I'm not joking, Kinch. You look damn well when you're dressed." "Thanks," Stephen said. "I can't wear them if they are gray." "He can't wear them," Buck Mulligan told his face in the mirror. "Etiquette is etiquette. He kills his mother, but he can't wear gray trousers." He folded his razor neatly and with stroking palps of his fingers felt the smooth skin. Next reader.
Stephen turned his gaze from the sea and to the plump face with its smoke blue, mobile eyes. "That fellow I was with in the ship last night," said Buck Mulligan, "says you have GPI. He's up in Dottyville with Connolly Norman. General paralysis of the insane." He swept the mirror in a half circle in the air to flash the tidings abroad in sunlight now radiant on the sea. His curling, shaven lips laughed, and the edges of his white, glittering teeth. Laughter seized all his strong, well-knit trunk. "Look at yourself," he said, "you dreadful bard." Stephen bent forward and peered at the mirror held out to him, cleft by a crooked crack, hair on end. "As he and others see me. Who chose this face for me? This dog's body to rid of vermin. It asks me too." "I pinched it out of the skivvy's room," Buck Mulligan said. "It does her all right. The aunt always keeps plain-looking servants for Malachi. Lead him not into temptation. Her name is Ursula." Laughing again, he brought the mirror away from Stephen's peering eyes. The rage of Caliban at not seeing his face in a mirror, he said, "If Wilde were only alive to see you." Drawing back and pointing, Stephen said with bitterness, "It is a symbol of Irish art, the cracked looking glass of a servant." Buck Mulligan suddenly linked his arm in Stephen's and walked with him round the tower, his razor and mirror clacking in the pocket where he had thrust them. "That's not fair to tease you like that, Kinch, is it?" he said kindly. "God knows you have more spirit than any of them." Katrina.
Parried again. "He fears the lancet of my art as I fear that of his, the cold steel pen. Cracked looking glass of a servant, tell that to the oxy chap downstairs and touch him for a guinea. He's stinking with money and thinks you're not a gentleman. His old fellow made his tin by selling jalap to Zulus or some bloody swindle or other. God, Kinch, if you and I could only work together, we might do something for the island. Hellenize it." Cranley's arm, his arm. "And to think of you having to beg from these swine. I'm the only one that knows what you are. Why don't you trust me anymore? What have you up your nose against me? Is it Haynes? If he makes any noise here, I'll bring down Seymour and we'll give him a ragging worse than they gave Clive Kempthorpe." Young shouts of moneyed voices in Clive Kempthorpe's rooms, pale faces. They hold their ribs with laughter, one clasping another. Oh, I shall expire. Break the news to her gently, Aubrey. I shall die. With the slit ribbons of his shirt whipping in the air, he hops and hobbles around the table with trousers down at heels, chased by aides of Magdalen with the tailor's shears. A scared calf's face gilded with marmalade. I don't want to be debagged. Don't you play the giddy ox with me? Shouts from the open window startled evening in the quadrangle. A deaf gardener, aproned, masked with Matthew Arnold's face, pushes his mower on the somber lawn, watching narrowly the dancing motes of grass palms. To ourselves, new paganism, umphalos. Let him stay, Stephen said. There's nothing wrong with him except at night. Then what is it? Buck Mulligan asked impatiently. Cough it up. I'm quite frank with you. What have you against me now? They halted, looking towards the blunt cape of gray head that lay on the water like the snout of a sleeping whale. Stephen freed his arm quietly. Do you wish me to tell you? He asked. Yes, what is it? Buck Mulligan answered. I don't remember anything. He looked in Stephen's face as he spoke. A light wind passed his brow, fanning softly his fair, uncombed hair and stirring silver points of anxiety in his eyes. Stephen, depressed by his own voice, said, Do you remember the first day I went to your house after my mother's death? Next, please.
Buck Mulligan frowned quickly and said, What? Where? I can't remember anything. I remember only ideas and sensations. Why? What happened in the name of God? You were making tea, Stephen said, and I went across the landing to get more hot water. Your mother and some visitor came out of the drawing room. She asked you who was in your room. Yes, Buck Mulligan said. What did I say? I forget. You said, Stephen answered. Oh, it's only Daedalus, whose mother is beastly dead. A flush, which made him seem younger and more engaging, rose to Buck Mulligan's cheek. Did I say that? He asked. Well, what harm is that? He shook his constraint from him nervously. And what is death, he asked, your mother's or yours or my own? You saw only your mother die. I see them pop off every day in the Mater and Richmond and cut up into tripes in the dissecting room. It's a beastly thing and nothing else. It simply doesn't matter. You wouldn't kneel down to pray for your mother on her deathbed when she asked you. Why? Because you have the cursed Jesuit strain in you, only it's injected the wrong way. To me, it's all a mockery and beastly. Her cerebral lobes are not functioning. She calls the doctor, Sir Peter Teasel, and picks buttercups off the quilt. Humor her till it's over. You crossed her last wish in death, and yet you sulk with me because I don't whinge like some hired mute from Lalouette. Absurd. I suppose I did say it. I didn't mean to offend the memory of your mother. Next, please.
He had spoken himself into boldness. Stephen, shielding the gaping wounds which the words had left in his heart, said very coldly, I'm not thinking of the offence to my mother. Of what then? Buck Mulligan asked. Of the offence to me, Stephen answered. Buck Mulligan swung round on his heel. Oh, an impossible person, he exclaimed. He walked off quickly round the parapet. Stephen stood at his post, gazing over the calm sea towards the headland. Sea and headland now grew dim. Pulses were beating in his eyes, veiling their sight, and he felt the fever of his cheeks. A voice within the tower called loudly, Are you up there, Mulligan? I'm coming, Buck Mulligan answered. He turned towards Stephen and said, Look at the sea. What does it care about offences? Chuck, Loyola, Kinch, and come on down. The Sassenach wants his morning rashers. His head halted again for a moment at the top of the staircase, level with the roof. Don't mope over it all day, he said. I'm inconsequent. Give up the moody brooding. His head vanished, but the drone of his descending voice boomed out of the stairhead. And no more turn aside and brood upon love's bitter mystery, for Fergus rules the brazen cars. Next, please.
Wood shadows floated silently by through the morning peace from the stairhead seaward where he gazed. Inshore and further out, the mirror of water whitened, spurned by light-shod, hurrying feet. White breast of the dim sea. The twining stresses, two by two, a hand plucking the harp strings, merging their twining chords. Wave-white wedded words shimmering on the dim tide. A cloud began to cover the sun slowly, wholly, shadowing the bay in deeper green. It lay beneath him, a bowl of bitter waters. Fergus's song. I sang it alone in the house, holding down the long, dark chords. Her door was open. She wanted to hear my music. Silent with awe and pity, I went to her bedside. She was crying in a wretched bed. For those words, Stephen, love's bitter mystery. Where now? Her secrets, old feather fans, tasseled dance cards, powdered with musk, a gaud of amber beads in her locked drawer. A bird cage hung in the sunny window of her house when she was a girl. She heard old Royce singing the pantomime of Turk the Terrible and laughed with others when he sang, I am the boy that can enjoy invisibility. Phantasmal mirth folded away, musk perfumed, and no more turn aside and brood. Folded away in the memory of nature with her toys. Memories beset his brooding brain. Her glass of water from the kitchen tap when she had approached the sacrament. A cored apple filled with brown sugar roasting for her at the hearth on a dark autumn evening. Her shapely fingernails reddened by the blood of squashed lice from the children's shirts. In a dream, silently, she had come to him, a wasted body within its loose grave clothes, giving off an odor of wax and rosewood. Her breath bent over him with mute, secret words, a faint odor of wetted ashes. Her glazing eyes staring out of death to shake and bend my soul. On me alone, the ghost candle to light her agony, ghostly light on the tortured face. Her hoarse, loud breath rattling in horror, all prayed on their knees. Her eye is on me to strike me down. Liliater vitulantium te confessorum torma circumvet, jubilatium te virginum cors expiat. Ghoul, chewer of corpses. No, mother, let me be and let me live. Next.
Kinch, ahoy! Buck Mulligan's voice sang from within the tower. It came nearer up the staircase, calling again. Stephen, still trembling at his soul's cry, heard warm, running sunlight, and in the air behind him, friendly words. Daedalus, come down like a good mosey. Breakfast is ready. Haynes is apologizing for waking us up last night. It's all right. I'm coming, Stephen said, turning. Do, for Jesus' sake, Buck Mulligan said. For my sake and for all our sakes. His head disappeared and reappeared. I told him your symbol of Irish art. He says it's very clever. Touch him for a quid, will you? Guinea, I mean. I get paid this morning, Stephen said. The school kip? Buck Mulligan said. How much? 4 quid. Let us one. If you want, Stephen said. 4 shining sovereigns. Buck Mulligan cried with delight. We'll have a glorious drunk to admonish the druids, 4 omnipotent sovereigns. He flung up his hands and tramped down the stone stairs, crying out of tune in a Cockney accent. Oh, won't we have a merry time drinking whiskey, beer, and wine on Coronation Day? Oh, won't we have a merry time on Coronation Day? Warm sunshine merrying over the sea. The nickel shaving bowls shone forgotten on the parapet. Why should I bring it down or leave it there all day? Forgotten friendship. Next.
Dave, turn on your
Yeah,
mic.
I got it. He went over to it, held it in his hands a while, feeling its coolness, smelling the clammy slaver of the lather in which the brush was stuck. So I carried the boat of incense then at Clongowes. I'm another now, and yet the same, a servant too, a server of a servant. In the gloomy, domed living room of the tower, Buck Mulligan's gowned form moved briskly to and fro about the hearth, hiding and revealing its yellow glow. 2 shafts of soft daylight fell across the flagged floor from the high barbacans, and at the meeting of their rays, a cloud of coal smoke and fumes of fried grease floated, turning. "We'll be choked," Buck Mulligan said. "Haynes, open that door, will you?" Stephen laid the shaving bowl on the locker. Tall figure rose from the hammock where it had been sitting, went to the doorway, and pulled open the inner doors. Have you the key?" a voice asked. "Daedalus has it," Buck Mulligan said. "Janie Machan choked." He howled without looking up from the fire. "Kinch!" "It's in the lock," Stephen said, coming forward. The key scraped round harshly twice, and, when the heavy door had been set ajar, welcome light and bright air entered. Haynes stood at the doorway looking out. Stephen hailed his upended valise to the table and sat down to wait. Buck Mulligan tossed the fry onto the dish beside him. Then he carried the dish and a large teapot over to the table, set them down heavily, and sighed with relief. "I'm melting," he said, as the candle remarked when, "But hush, not a word more on that subject. Kinch, wake up. Bread, butter, honey. Haynes, come in, the grub is ready. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts. Where's the sugar? Oh, Jay, there's no milk." Stephen fetched the loaf and the pot of honey and the butter cooler from the locker. Buck Mulligan sat down in a sudden pet. "What sort of kip is this?" he said. "I told her to come after 8. "We can drink it black," Stephen said thirstily. "There's a lemon in the locker." "Oh, damn you and your Paris fads," Buck Mulligan said. "I want Sandy Cove milk." Haynes came in from the doorway and said quietly, "That woman is coming up with the milk." "The blessings of God on you," Buck Mulligan cried, jumping up from his chair. "Sit down, pour out the tea there. The sugar's in the bag. Here, I can't go fumbling at the damned eggs." He hacked through the fry in the dish and slapped it out on 3 plates, saying, "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti." Haynes sat down to pour out the tea. "I'm giving you 2 lumps each," he said. "But I say, Mulligan, do you make strong tea, don't you?" Buck Mulligan, hewing thick slices from the loaf, said in an old woman's wheedling voice, "When I makes tea, as old Mother Grogan said. And when I makes water, I makes water." "By Jove, it is tea," Haynes said. Buck Mulligan went on hewing and wheedling. "So I do, Mrs. Cahill," says she. "Begob, ma'am," says Mrs. Cahill. "God send you don't make them God send you don't make them in the one pot." He lunged toward his messmates in turn, a thick slice of bread impaled on his knife. Next, please.
"That's folk," he said earnestly, "by your book, Haynes. 5 lines of text and 10 pages of notes about the folk and the fish gods of Dundrum. printed by the Weird Sisters in the year of the big wind. He turned to Stephen and asked in a fine, puzzled voice, lifting his brows, "Can you recall, brother, is Mother Grogan's tea and water pot spoken of in the Mabogyan or is in the Upanishads?" "I doubt it," said Stephen gravely. "Do you now?" Buck Mulligan said in the same tone. "Your reasons, pray?" "I fancy," Stephen said as he ate, "it did not exist in or out of the Mabogyan. Mother Grogan was, one imagined, a kinswoman of Mary Ann." Buck Mulligan's face smiled with delight. "Charming," he said, in a finical, sweet voice, showing his white teeth, and blinking his eyes pleasantly. "Do you think she was?" "Quite charming." Then suddenly, overclouding all his features, he growled in a hoarsened, rasping voice as he hewed again vigorously at the loaf. "For old Mary Ann, she doesn't care a damn but hissing up her petticoats." He crammed his mouth with fry and munched and droned. The doorway was darkened by an entering form. "The milk, sir." "Come in, ma'am," Mulligan said. "Kinch, get the jug." An old woman came forward and stood by Stephen's elbow. "There's a lovely morning air, sir," she said. "Glory be to God." "To whom?" Mulligan said, glancing at her. "Ah, to be sure." Stephen reached back and took the milk jug from the locker. "The islanders," Mulligan said to Haines casually, "speak frequently of the collector of prepuces." "How much, sir?" said the woman. "A quart," Stephen said. He watched her pour out the measure and thence into the jug rich white milk not hers. Old shrunken paps. She poured again a measureful and a tilly. Old and secret, she had entered from a morning world, maybe a messenger. She praised the goodness of the milk, pouring it out. Crouching by a patient cow at daybreak in the lush field, a witch on her toadstool, her wrinkled fingers quick at the squirting dugs. They lowed about her whom they knew, Dewsilly cattle, silk of the kine, and poor old woman, names given her in old times. A wandering crone, lowly from an immortal serving her conqueror and her gay betrayer. Their common coquine, a messenger from the secret morning, to serve or to upbraid, whether he could not tell, but scorned to beg her favour. "It is indeed, ma'am," Buck Mulligan said, pouring milk into their cups. "Taste it, sir," she said. He drank at her bidding. "If we could only live on good food like that," he said to her, somewhat loudly, "we wouldn't have the country full of rotten teeth and rotten guts, living in a bog swamp, eating cheap food, and the streets paved with dust, horse dung, and consumptive spit." "Are you a medical student, sir?" the old woman asked. "I am, ma'am," Buck Mulligan answered. "Next, please."
Stephen listened in scornful silence. She bows her old head to a voice that speaks to her loudly, her bone setter, her medicine man. Me she slights. To the voice that will shrive and oil for the grave all there is of her, but her woman's unclean loins, a man's flesh made not in God's likeness, the serpent's prey, and to the loud voice that now bids her be silent with wondering unsteady eyes. "Do you understand what he says?" Stephen asked her. "Is it French you're talking, sir?" the old woman said to Haines. Haines spoke to her again in longer speech, confidently. "Irish," Buck Mulligan said. "Is there Gaelic on you?" "I thought it was Irish," she said, "by the sound of it. Are you from the West, sir?" "I am an Englishman," Haines answered. "He's English," Buck Mulligan said, "and he thinks we ought to speak Irish in Ireland." "Oh, well, sure we ought to," the old woman said, "and I'm ashamed I don't speak the language myself. I'm told it's a grand language by them that knows." "Grand is no name for it," said Buck Mulligan. "Wonderful entirely. Fill us out some more tea, Kench. Would you like a cup, ma'am?" "Oh, no, thank you, sir," the old woman said, slipping the ring of the milk can on her forearm and about to go. Haynes said to her, have you your bill? We'd better pay her, Mulligan, hadn't we? Stephen filled the 3 cups. Bill, sir? Well, it's 7 mornings a pint at 2 pence, is 7 twos is a shilling and 2 pence over, and these 3 mornings a quart at 4 pence is 3 quarts is a shilling and 1 and 2 is 2 and 2, sir. Buck Mulligan sighed, and having filled his mouth with the crust thickly buttered on both sides, stretched forth his legs and began to search his trouser pockets. Pay up and look pleasant, Haynes said to him, smiling. Stephen filled a 3rd cup, a spoonful of tea coloring, a spoonful of tea coloring faintly the thick, rich milk. Mulligan brought up a florin, twisted it around in his fingers, and cried, a miracle! He passed it along the table towards the old woman, saying, ask nothing more of me, sweet. All I can give you, I give. Stephen laid the coin in her uneager hand. We'll owe 2 pence, he said. Time enough, sir, she said, taking the coin. Time enough. Good morning, sir. Next, please.
She curtsied and went out, followed by Buck Mulligan's tender chant, heart of my heart, wear it more. More would be laid at your feet. He turned to Stephen and said, seriously, Daedalus, I'm stony. Hurry out to your school keep and bring us back some money. Today the bards must drink a junket. Ireland expects that every man this day will do his duty. That reminds me, Haynes said, rising, that I have to visit your National Library today. Our swim first, Buck Mulligan said. He turned to Stephen and asked blandly, is this the day for your monthly wash, Kinch? Then he said to Haynes, the unclean bard makes a point of washing once a month. All Ireland is washed by the Gulf Stream, Stephen said, as he let honey trickle over a slice of the loaf. Haynes, from the corner where he was knotting easily a scarf about the loose collar of his tennis shirt, spoke. I intend to make a collection of your sayings, if you will let me. Speaking to me, they wash and tub and scrub. I can bite them in with conscience. Yeah, here's a spot. That one about the cracked looking glass of a servant being the symbol of Irish art is deuced good. Buck Mulligan kicked Stephen's foot onto the table and said with warmth of tone, wait till you hear him on Hamlet, Haynes. Well, I mean it, Haynes said, still speaking to Stephen. I was just thinking of it when that poor old creature came in. Would I make money by it? Stephen asked. Haynes laughed, and as he took a soft grey hat from the holdfast of the hammock, said, I don't know, I'm sure. He strolled out of the doorway. Buck Mulligan bent across to Stephen and said with coarse vigour, you put your hoof in it now. What did you say that for? Next, please.
Well, Stephen said, the problem is to get money. From whom? From the milkwoman or from him? It's a toss-up, I think. I blow him about you, Buck Mulligan said, and then you come along with your lousy leer and your gloomy Jesuit jibes. I see little hope, Stephen said, from her or from him. Buck Mulligan sighed tragically and laid his hand on Stephen's arm. From me, Kinch, he said. In a suddenly changed tone, he added, to tell you the God's truth, I think you're right. Damn all else they're good for. Why don't you play them as I do? To hell with them all. Let us get out of the kip. He stood up gravely, ungirdled and disrobed himself of his gown, saying resignedly, Mulligan is stripped of his garments. He emptied his pockets on the table. There's your snot rag, he said. And putting on his stiff collar and rebellious tie, he spoke to them, chiding them, and to his dangling watch chain. His hands plunged and rummaged in his trunk. Well, he called for a clean handkerchief. Again bite of inwit. God, we'll simply have to dress the character. I want puce gloves and green boots. Contradiction. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then. I contradict myself. Mercurial Malachi, a limp black missile flew out of his talking hands. And there's your Latin Quarter hat, he said. Stephen picked it up and put it on. Haines called to them from the doorway. Are you coming, young fellows? I'm ready, Buck Mulligan answered, going towards the door. Come out, Kinch. You've eaten all we've left, I suppose. Resigned, he passed out with grave words and gait, saying well nigh with sorrow, and going forth he met Butterly. Stephen, taking his ash plant from its leaning place, followed them out, and as they went down the ladder, pulled to the slow iron door and locked it. He put the huge key in his inner pocket. At the foot of the ladder, Buck Mulligan asked, Did you bring the key? I have it, Stephen said, preceding them. He walked on. Behind him, he heard Buck Mulligan club with his heavy bath towel the leader shoots of ferns or grasses. Down, sir! How dare you, sir? Haines asked. Do you pay rent for this tower? 12 quid, Buck Mulligan said. To the Secretary of State for War, Stephen added over his shoulder. They halted while Haines surveyed the tower and said at last, Rather bleak in wintertime, I should say. Martello, you call it. Billy Pitt had them built, Buck Mulligan said, when the French were on the sea, but ours is the omphalos. What is your idea of Hamlet? Haines asked Stephen. Oh, no, Buck Mulligan shouted in pain. I'm not equal to Thomas Aquinas and the 55 reasons he has made to prop it up. Wait till I have a few pints in me first. He turned to Stephen, saying as he pulled down neatly the peaks of his primrose waistcoat, You couldn't manage it under 3 pints, Kinch, could you? It has waited so long, Stephen said listlessly. It can wait longer. You pique my curiosity, Haines said amiably. Is it some paradox? Oh, Buck Mulligan said, we have grown out of wild and paradoxes. It's quite simple. He proves by algebra that Hamlet's grandson is Shakespeare's grandfather, and that he himself is the ghost of his own father. What? Haines said, beginning to point at Stephen. He himself? Buck Mulligan slung his towel stolewise around his neck, and bending in loose laughter, said to Stephen's ear, Oh, shade of Kinch the elder, Japhet in search of a father. We're always tired in the morning, Stephen said to Haines, and it is rather long to tell. Next, please.
Buck Mulligan, walking forward again, raised his hands. The sacred pint alone can unbind the tongue of Daedalus, he said. I mean to say, Haines explained to Stephen as they followed, this tower and these cliffs here remind me somehow of Elsinore. That beetles or his base into the sea, isn't it? Buck Mulligan turned suddenly for an instant toward Stephen, but did not speak. In the bright, silent instant, Stephen saw his own image in cheap, dusty mourning between their gay attires. It's a wonderful tale, Haines said, bringing them to halt again. Eyes pale as the sea the wind had freshened, paler, firm, and prudent. The sea's ruler, he gazed southward over the bay, empty save for the smoke plume of the mailboat, vague on the bright skyline, and a sail tacking by the Muglins. I read a theological interpretation of it somewhere, he said, bemused. The father and son idea, the son striving to be atoned with the father. Buck Mulligan at once put on a blithe, broadly smiling face. He looked at them, his well-shaped mouth open happily, his eyes from which he had suddenly withdrawn all shrewd sense, blinking with mad gaiety. He moved a doll's head to and fro, the brims of his Panama hat quivering, and began to chant in a quiet, happy, foolish voice. I'm the queerest young fellow that ever you heard. My mother's a Jew, my father's a bird. With Joseph the joiner I cannot agree, so here's to disciples and Calvary. He held up a forefinger of warning. If anyone thinks I am't divine, he'll get no free drinks when I'm making the wine, but have to drink water and wish it were plain that I make the wine becomes water again. He tugged swiftly at Stephen's ash plant in farewell, and running forward to a brow of the cliff, fluttered his hands at his sides like fins or wings of one about to rise in the air, and chanted, "Goodbye now, goodbye, write down all I said, and tell Tom, Dick, and Harry I rose from the dead. What's bred in the bone cannot fail me to fly, and Olivet's breezy, goodbye now, goodbye." Next.
He capered before them down towards the 40-foot hole, fluttering his wing-like hands, leaping nimbly, Mercury's hat quivering in the fresh wind that bore back to them his brief, bird-like cries. Haynes, who had been laughing guardedly, walked on beside Stephen and said, "We oughtn't to laugh, I suppose. He's rather blasphemous. I'm not a believer myself, that is to say. Still, his gaiety takes the harm out of it somehow, doesn't it?" What did he call it? Joseph the Joiner? "The Ballad of Joking Jesus," Stephen answered. "Oh," Haynes said, You've heard it before." "3 times a day, after meals," Stephen said dryly. "You're not a believer, are you?" Haynes asked. "I mean, a believer in the narrow sense of the word, creation from nothing and miracles and a personal God." "There's only one sense of the word, it seems to me," Stephen said. Haynes stopped to take out a smooth silver case in which twinkled a green stone. He sprang it open with his thumb and offered it. "Thank you," Stephen said, taking a cigarette. Haynes helped himself and snapped the case too. He put it back in his side pocket and took from his waistcoat pocket a nickel tinderbox, sprang it open too, and having lit his cigarette, held the flame spunk towards Stephen in the shell of his hands. "Yes, of course," he said, as they went on again. "Either you believe or you don't, isn't it? Personally, I couldn't stomach that idea of a personal God. You don't stand for that, I suppose." "You behold in me," Stephen said with grim displeasure, "a horrible example of free thought." He walked on, waiting to be spoken to, trailing his ash plant by his side. Miss Ferrule followed lightly on the path, squealing at his heels. My familiar after me, calling Stephen. A wavering line along the path. They will walk on it tonight, coming here in the dark. He wants that key. It is mine. I pay the rent. Now I eat his salt bread. Give him the key too? All. He will ask for it. That was in his eyes. After all, Haynes began. Stephen turned and saw that the cold gaze which had measured him was not at all unkind. After all, I should think you are able to free yourself. You are your own master, it seems to me. Katrina?
"I am a servant of 2 masters," Stephen said, "an English and an Italian." "Italian?" Haynes said. "A crazy queen, old and jealous, kneel down before me." "And a third," Stephen said, "there is who wants me for odd jobs." And a third, Stephen said, there is who wants me for odd jobs. "Italian?" Haynes said again. "What do you mean?" "The Imperial British State," Stephen answered, his color rising, "and the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church." Haynes detached from his underlip some fibers of tobacco before he spoke. I can quite understand that, he said calmly. An Irishman must think like that, I dare say. We feel in England that we have treated you rather unfairly. It seems history is to blame. The proud, potent titles clanged over Stephen's memory, the triumph of their brazen bells, et unum sanctum Catholicum et apostolicum ecclesiam. The slow growth and change of rite and dogma, like his own rare thoughts, a chemistry of stars. Symbol of the apostles in the Mass for the Pope Marcellus, the voices blended, singing alone loud in affirmation, and behind their chant, the vigilant angel of the church militant disarmed and menaced her heresiarchs. A horde of heresies fleeing with miters awry, Photius and the brood of mockers, of whom Mulligan was one, and Arius, warring his life long upon consubstantiality of the Son and the Father, and Valentine, spurning Christ's tearing body, and the subtle African heresiarch Sibelius, who held that the Father was himself his own Son. Words Mulligan had spoken a moment since in mockery to the stranger, idle mockery. The void awaits surely all them that weave the wind, a menace, a disarming, and a worsting from the embattled angels of the church, Michael's host, who defend her ever in the hour of conflict with their lances and their shields. Next, please.
Hear, hear, prolonged applause. Zoot, nom de Dieu. Of course I am a Britisher, Haynes' voice said, and I feel as one. I don't want to see my country fall into the hands of German Jews either. That's our national problem, I'm afraid, just now. Two men stood at the verge of the cliff, watching. Businessman, boatman. She's making for Bullock Harbour. The boatman nodded towards the north of the bay with some disdain. There's 5 fathoms out there, he said. It'll be swept up that way when the tide comes in about 1. It's 9 days today. The man that was drowned, a sail veering about the blank bay, waiting for a swollen bundle to bob up, roll over to the sun, a puffy face, salt white. Here I am. They followed the winding path down to the creek. Buck Mulligan stood on a stone in shirt sleeves, his unclipped tie rippling over his shoulder. A young man clinging to a spur of rock near him moved slowly, frog-wise, his green legs in the deep jelly of the water. Next, please.
Is the brother with you, Malachi? Down in Westmeath with the Banyans. Still there. I got a card from Banyan. Says he found a sweet young thing down there. Photo girl, he calls her. Snapshot, eh? Brief exposure. Buck Mulligan sat down to unlace his boots. An elderly man shut up near the spur of a rock, a glowing red face. He scrambled up the stones, water glistening on his pate, and on his garland of grey hair, water rilling over his chest and paunch, and spilling just out of his black, sagging loincloth. Buck Mulligan made way for him to scramble past, and glancing at Haynes and Stephen, crossed himself piously with his thumbnail at bow and lips and breastbone. Seymour's back in town, the young man said, grasping again his spur of rock. Chucked medicine and going in for the army. Ah, go to God, Buck Mulligan said. Going over next week to Stew. You know that Red Carlisle girl, Lily? Yes. Spooning with him last night on the pier. The father's a rotter with money. She up the pole. Better ask Seymour that. Seymour, a bleeding officer, Buck Mulligan said. He nodded to himself as he drew off his trousers and stood up, saying tritely, Red-headed women buck like goats. He broke off in alarm, feeling his side under his flapping shirt. Next, please.
Lois?
I'm sorry. My 12th rib is gone, he cried. I'm the Ubermensch, toothless Kinch and I, the Superman. He struggled out of his shirt and flung it behind him to where his clothes lay. Are you going in there, Malachi? Yes, make room in the bed. The young man shoved himself backward through the water and reached the middle of the creek in 2 long, clean strokes. Haynes sat down on a stone, smoking. Are you not coming in? Buck Mulligan asked. Later on, Haynes said. Not on my breakfast. Stephen turned away. I'm going, Mulligan, he said. Give us that key, Kinch, Mulligan said, to keep my chemise flat. Stephen handed him the key. Buck Mulligan laid it across his heaped clothes. And 2 pence, he said, for a pint. Throw it there. Stephen threw 2 pennies on the soft heap. Dressing, undressing. Buck Mulligan, erect, with the joined hands before him, said solemnly, He who stealeth from the poor lendeth to the Lord. Thus spake Zarathustra. His plump body plunged. We'll see you again, Haynes said, turning as Stephen walked up the path and smiling at Wild Irish. Horn of a bull, hoof of a horse, smile of a Saxon. The ship, Buck Mulligan cried. 12:30. Good, Stephen said. He walked along the upcurving path. Liata ritulantium turma circumdet, jubilantium te virginum. The priest's grey nimbus in a niche where he dressed discreetly. I will not sleep here tonight. Home also I cannot go. A voice, sweetened and sustained, called to him from the sea. Turning the curve, he waved his hand. It called again. A sleek brown head, a seal's, far out on the water, round. Usurper. Next.
All right. Well, very good. I think we'll stop here today, though. I think
There's,
very good reading. Thank you all very much. Yeah.
there's a lot in that.
Yeah.
One thing that came to me after many readings of this is that last bit is he's hearing the belfry from St. Mary's Star of the Sea when he, instead of it being hi ho, hi ho, hi ho, hi ho, hi ho, hi ho, which we hear another time, he in his own mind, Stephen says, Liliata rutilantium turma circumdet jubilantium te virginum.
Mm-hmm. And that is?
Well, it's part of the service for the dead, but he had been thinking about it. He'd been musing about it earlier when he was thinking about his mother. And it's just something people do. When you hear bells or things, you set words to them. I mean, it's something we've all done, I'm sure, at one time or another. And that had been in his head earlier. And it's now 9:15. It's one of the many indicators of the time. The mail boat is one of them, but there's and this is just he's hearing in the distance. He can hear the bells from the church, the Westminster chimes, and to go along with that long drawn out chiming, he sets the words to them, which is not the full quote. I mean, he's just using what fits the chiming, I think.
Yeah.
That's just my idea, but I think there's something to it.
Yeah, I think you're right on there. Of course, the hi ho is going to be Leopold later on, but yeah. Susan, this is your first time. Are you enjoying the reading?
Yes, I am, although I did not realize we were going to be handing a baton like in a relay race. So
okay.
I'm very glad I read it, and because my original copy, I told you, is from 1974 and it's held together by tape, I've got the Wordsworth edition on Kindle, which is great because it means I can look across at the screen down rather than down at the book and keep track of how I look and how you all look listening to me. And I'm very curious if you could answer my curiosity. How many participants are in the USA and how many in Ireland?
USA?
USA?
USA, raise your hand. So
Ireland?
Ireland, yeah.
And anywhere else?
Brazil.
From
Brazil.
Brazil.
Okay.
Just in it today.
Yeah,
Next
yeah.
time.
Hi, Gloria.
Hi, Annie.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Next time we read.
Okay. Well, we waited.
Domingo.
Yeah. Susan, you read very well, particularly
you.
considering I think this might.
I'm in a Shakespeare society and we're doing a play each semester. And in the fall, I was Desdemona in Othello. So not only did I have to speak and be slapped and whatnot, but I had to sing, which for me was very, very hard. It's a pleasure to hear you all singing the tunes that you know. I can't do it.
Well, you did really well, and I thought while you were reading that you had some experience in public reading. So
Yeah.
that's great.
The other thing I wanted to point out is I have this very mammoth annotated edition, and there are just hundreds and hundreds of footnotes, so that I knew, for example, that the first poem that's quoted is from Yeats, and there's a quote from a play. Anyway, if you're curious and have time, you can follow all these things up. Although you probably all know them by now.
No.
No, don't know them.
Hardly.
I do have two editions of those particular annotations, which I refer to occasionally, but the things that come to me, like as we're reading this, is Joyce's ability to be pointing out everydayness. He's using everydayness and he's using physical descriptions to help us get into each of the characters. And I find that quite marvelous. This is probably I'm a relative newbie. It's probably my sixth time going through Ulysses, but I enjoyed reading the first chapter today every bit as much and maybe even more than the earlier films.
Absolutely. Having read the book, I think this may be my fourth time now. You know so much more now when you read the first episode because you've seen all of the explication that goes on further. But when I first started reading this many, many years ago, I had no idea what was going on in this episode. And I wonder why Joyce chose to start this book at this location. I'm sitting here in the US. I know nothing about this crazy place in Ireland with a tower and a gun I had no idea what was going on. And going upstairs and coming downstairs, I had no idea. And it totally flummoxed me. Well, now, having read it a couple of times, I can picture it. I can see it. I can understand it. But why in heaven's name did Joyce decide to start in this rather obscure place? Or maybe it's not so obscure.
Because it's where he had been. I mean, everything Joyce writes comes from his own experience in one way or another. It might be his experience of reading, because he borrows a lot from other writers, but it's his own everyday life. He spent time in the Martello Tower. He knew the Martello Tower. He could remember the Martello Tower. And again, he's writing this in exile at a distance, not being able to go back. He's just remembering it all. It helps. When I was in Ireland in 2022, I went to the Martello Tower, and it helps to have been there to see, to know what the steps are like and to know what it's like to go up the parapet and to look at the sea. It's a marvelous experience. If you ever get an opportunity, you have to go. It's just a brilliant experience.
Lois, I also find it helpful to think of the parallel with the Odyssey. And so we're starting with Telemachus, and that each chapter has a parallel in Ulysses, and it helps.
I think those parallels are overstated.
Yes,
and I ignore I have to say I ignore them. I will not call this chapter Telemachus. This is section 1, episode 1.
Yeah, I have to say
that's been
every time I post a notice on Facebook saying we will be starting the Telemachus section today, I always think
you think of Bill.
Bill is rolling his eyes, right?
But
it's one thing I wanted to point out. It's a very long poem, but if you get an opportunity, look up The Triumph of Time by Swinburne. That's the poem that Mulligan and Stephen are referring to with the Great Mother Sea. Is from The Triumph of Time by Swinburne. It's a beautiful
thanks
poem.
for that. Thanks for that. I'll check that one out.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I like about this group. Every week I find something else to check out I never knew before.
There you go. I would like to say that he starts twice, and this is the first start. They're waking up. In addition to so-called Ulysses parallels, there's the time through the day. So if you're going to start in the morning, you got to start somewhere. And he's starting with each of his, quote, main characters waking up. In one case, Martello Tower, it's Stephen Dedalus. And then, as we'll find later on, we have Leopold Bloom waking up. And
if you believe that nonsense.
Well, yeah, I should say that I believe in the inherent ambiguity of everything, including all the words that we use, but we try to make sense of the world somehow. So we make best guesses.
And you, William, made the point that it is a mock mass we're witnessing as well. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are underlying structures, and yes, you can pay too much attention to them, but they can be helpful. And the annotated book will provide the extract from Swinburne, from all the other references that you might need. So it's worth investing in.
Yeah, he's well aware of it. Let me jump in and mention one thing before our time slips away. Gloria is here from Brazil, and Gloria runs the Ulysses reading group in Brazil, which we have just completed reading Ulysses, and we will start in the same. Well, actually, this next Saturday, we're going to complete the last little bit, and then we're going to begin the beginning of the book in Portuguese, which if you're like me and you like to read it in different languages, it's a great opportunity, and the people who participate are very accepting, and they will even help you over time learn to improve your Portuguese pronunciation.
Oh,
Should you be interested, get in touch with me at any time, and I will provide you with that login information. It's on Saturdays. It would be 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, for example.
What time is
in Brazil?
That would be 4 o'clock in Ireland.
Oh, I'm sorry, what time is it in Brazil? I've got some friends there. I might
1 p.m. 1 p.m.
1 p.m.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I might mention it to
Oh,
them.
Okay.
Good.
How many months is it going to take us to get through?
Ah,
6.
Which one?
6 months?
Ulysses.
You mean what we started today?
Yeah.
The last time was right around 6 months. But I think with the crossed fingers and knock on wood, by the time you go for Bloomsday, you should have read the entire book. With the,
It takes about 3 minutes per page, and so if we do 20 pages, that's an hour, and there are in my copy, I can't remember now.
what have I got? 600 and
Little more than 600 in most
yeah.
editions.
Anyway, the last
Yeah.
time I actually went through and looked at it based upon the various archived videos, and it took us right about 6 months.
Yeah, wait. That we started in 5/11/23, May 11th, and then we just finished last week.
Mm.
So it's a little bit more than 6 months.
Okay. Well, we'll
Some,
just read faster this time.
No, was it Susan, you're doing some project or something that you need to be finished?
No,
up?
I'm going to visit a friend in Dublin for Bloomsday, which will
Oh,
be
okay.
the first time. But
So
I
you
have
want
been
it
to
to be
Dublin before, so I want to reread it in time for that. I may have to
Okay.
accelerate at the end. I'm also traveling a lot this spring and winter and spring, but I will join you whenever I can. And thanks to Kindle, I don't have to lug around this door-stopping book.
And the video archives are always available. I post them.
Okay.
Sometimes I mess up and I post them a week late, but they're all there.
Mhm.
Way to do it. And I will say with Mr. Kennedy and Mr. Kinney and Orla and Sylvia and Jim Sullivan, I mean, you're going to be, and Ann Doyle, you're going to be well schooled.
Yes.
Yeah, I look forward to that, Duncan. I've made 2 attempts previously on my own to read Ulysses, and I have given up the ghost. So I'm hoping this time, with your help and support, I'll succeed.
Yes,
We'll
you will.
succeed.
It took me 3 tries to get through the whole thing, and it was because of this group I made the third one.
Good. Oh, great,
It
Lois. That's great
works.
to know. Thank you.
It
Thank you for
works.
that. Yes.
It's-
Excellent. Excellent.
It's
On at least 2 occasions in Cleveland for Bloomsday, I think it was 4 years apart, we read the entire book over 3 days.
Wow.
It takes about 3 10-hour days. We reread the whole thing, give or take. I think we might have spent 11 hours on one day. I can't remember, but
There is
go ahead.
there's a theater group in New York called the Elevator Repair Service. Don't ask me why, but they do massive full readings of things. They did The Great Gatsby in one day, and I went to that. They're about to do Ulysses. Now, I'm sure they can't do it in one day.
3
but I
days.
will let
Yeah, 36
Okay.
hours. Is my
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I assume it will be an abridged version.
Unless they don't stop at all and they read through the night and then to the next day, but it can't be done in one day.
Yeah, I don't know. I've gotten the ad for it. Its tickets aren't ready yet, but I'm on their list, so I'll let you know.
but
They actually do a 24-hour reading in Dublin. But
Yeah.
again, it's a non-stop reading.
Joe,
quite literally.
were you involved in that when they did it a few years ago in recent time?
Yeah, we did it the year of the pandemic, I think.
That is,
Yeah,
that's right.
2020.
That's right.
At
'Cause I
Sweden.
remember I tried to stay up the whole 24 hours, but I didn't quite.
Yeah, no, I wasn't involved in that. But what I was involved a good few years before was a round the planet read, where we began it in Dublin, and this is just like there was no Zoom. This was done on early Skype,
Mhm.
And, we just passed it on. And the guys in Australia finished it. I think it was actually New Zealand that finished it. But it was interesting. But it would, you were hoping that Skype would stay up. Very primitive. It was interesting to find it circling the world.
Yeah. Oh.
One thing that struck me today is that it struck me that some of Molly's character were taken from Stephen's memories of his mother. That there's a great deal of Stephen's mother in the character of Molly, which I hadn't really seen or noticed before.
Can you give one example, Bill?
Well, I'd have to go back and find the spot that it struck me, but let me see.
No problem, no pressure.
Duncan, while he's looking for that, you will remind us where we're picking up next week?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
And how far we're going. I find it, from my point of view, imperative to read the text beforehand so that I know.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that we'll be going to from page what to what.
What did you say, Bill? You thought that it was about 20 pages each time?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but we finished in my copy, which is the Random House.
We did the first 3 episodes in 3 different readings.
We did
'Cause they're all short enough.
24 pages, 24 pages in my copy. So we're on page 25 in the Random House edition.
Right. So,
or the Modern Library edition, I should say.
we're going to be, of course, we're going to be starting with you, Cochrane. What city? So Nestor, starting the Nestor.
Okay.
That's one thing that's nice about the first section is pretty much one reading each time. And so if you read 25 to 30 pages, you will have read more than we will like.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the way to do it. But this is convenient because we're going to be starting on a section. Now, there's lots of times we can't complete a section. And so at the end of the reading, I go around and I collect the page numbers from everybody who is reading. So some people reading Gabler, some people reading Wordsworth, some people reading the long penguin, some people reading the short penguin. So it'll be incumbent on you're reading the Kindle version. Look and see later what page your Kindle ended
Well, that's very hard to know because
Or
change the font. And I did notice
Duncan will also tell us or tell you what the first line is, and you can search that in your Kindle and get there. So it should
there
be
were
easy.
significant differences in terminology or minor ones between the Wordsworth version and some of what you read.
Gabler.
Yeah, my Gabler is frequently different from what the other guys are reading.
I would get rid of it.
I've noticed that as well.
I know, but it's so beat up and nice. I love it.
Well,
I
save
have
it.
marginal notes all over it.
Save it as an artifact, but get a good one to read.
No, I have to have my notes. I carry this with me when I travel. Just like you were saying, Susan, you're glad you don't have to. I do. I just said it's old, beat up. I tape it together. I have little notes and give it up.
There you go. Okay, well,
what struck me is in my copy on page 11, it's right after and no more turn aside and brood upon love's bitter mystery, that little and then 2 paragraphs down or so, he's thinking about his mother, Stephen is, and where now her secrets, old feather fans, tasseled dance cards, powdered with musk, a gaud of amber beads in her locked drawer, a bird cage hung in the sunny window of her house when she was a girl, She heard old Royce sing in the pantomime of Turco the Terrible and laughed with others. To me, that's where Stephen gets a lot of Molly's character.
Okay, and I think that's an excellent example. Excellent example. I would also like to point out that he used in this particular section Agenbite of Inwit
Yes.
at least twice.
Twice.
That will
Mm.
be a key term by the time we get to chapter 3, Proteus.
Mhm.
And I just found out that that's actually the title of a book,
Right.
medieval book.
Yeah.
The Bite
Medieval.
of Conscience. So, and
Mhm.
then of course there's the little thing, the little tiny mention. There's the mention of history is to blame, and then we have the little mention of photo girl, he calls her.
Right.
Mm.
Which of
Yes.
course we will
It's
discuss
Millie.
photo girl
yeah.
later in the book.
Again, to me, this is where Stephen gets the idea for Millie. I mean, that's I'm not going to go into my whole theory here, but to me, this is one of the things that he picks up on, and then so when he creates the character, she's now a photo girl down in Mullingar, but there is no photo girl in Mullingar, in my reading of it.
She's a creation.
Yeah.
And eventually, Susan, Bill will tell us his theory. It's something during the reading. And it's very
Maybe.
good and it's very interesting.
Okay. Is Hamlet's ghost William's father?
Mm.
I don't know. He hasn't said so yet. But Bill is full of mysteries, so who knows what'll come next. Anyway,
I just want to hear a few words from Joe. I wait for Joe to say something.
Well, I say good night to everyone. Just thinking of that Turco the Terrible that Bill was saying, you know, I am the boy that can be precisely dated.
Yes.
To the what's it called? The Gaiety Theatre is a famous theatre in Dublin, and that was their first ever Christmas pantomime in, forgive me if I'm wrong now, from memory, 1873.
Mm-hmm.
And so the poignancy of this is he's remembering his mother as a little girl. You know, did anyone ever go through it? Close relatives from another generation, there are little things they kept that survived after them when they die. And here Royce actually performed in it. It says she heard old Royce sing. And
well, I would say she wasn't a little girl, because that would have made her 9 years old when Joyce was born. So
I take the point.
But she was a young woman.
Not little. She's a young lady.
Yeah.
But it kind of, as we read that, I was glad we had read Stephen Hero, because I got wandering off stage here, really. There's I have a different feel for Stephen's mother since we read Stephen Hero, and for the closeness and the importance. I always thought, you know, like, well, everyone's mother dies. What's the big deal? But now I know. I got the feeling, and it was lovely to feel that. That was what was new for me this time around.
Oh, yes.
You're right. You know what I'm when I hear all that mother stuff, is D.H. Lawrence's Sons and Lovers. You know, his relationship with his mother.
Yeah.
And I was a big fan of that when I was you know, there's just something about that gritting. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. And the whole, like, in a way, there's no doubt Buck Mulligan is right when he says you could at least, for your mother, have It wasn't going to kill you, you know.
Lawrence came after. And
yeah, Lawrence comes out.
Lawrence killed his mother with an overdose.
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
in Sons and Lovers.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's very sort of Greek theatre, isn't it? You know, it's sort of. But and her little bird cage, that was what made me think of Little Girl. You know, and like utterly useless thing. What do you do with it? You know, you end up putting it in the skip. You know. So
my memory of D.H. Lawrence, Sons and Lovers, and it's a donkey years ago. I thought that she, different from Stephen's mother, is that she tried to dominate their lives. You know, overly dominate, not like a normal loving mother.
Yeah.
Who'd want the best. She was slightly different. That's the only memory I haven't read it in donkey's years. That she was slightly different.
I want to change the subject just for a second, if we can, just to point out on page 9 in my text, it's the first instance of Stephen's artistic process, of Stephen's creative process, of his telling a story, and that's when Mulligan just mentions. We'll give him a ragging worse than they gave Clive Kempthorpe. Now, Stephen did not go to Oxford, did not know Clive Kempthorpe, had no notion of it. So everything that comes after that is all his mental creation. It's not, Stephen didn't witness that. He may have heard about it, but this is Stephen's memory. This is Stephen's creative thing. He's telling a story about how they ragged Clive Kempthorpe and how they tried to take his trousers down and all that. Because he was not at Oxford, Stephen, and did not witness this.
I assumed that he had heard that story and that he was reporting a story that he had heard.
Well, that's possible, but I think he's creating the story.
And then do you pronounce it Aids of Magdalen? Because don't the English call it
Magdalen School.
Yeah, right.
Magdalen College.
Yeah.
I don't know what AIDS means, but
Well, I just want to stress once again the importance of paying attention to the little physical descriptions that Joyce is making, and who he attaches the descriptions to. For example, and with Mulligan, Mulligan is very down to earth, but he's a mocking down to earth. There's not a philosophical, spiritual bone in the old boy. And I think everything that he does with Mulligan points out to that. All of what Mulligan says is constant mocking, whereas Stephen is constantly brooding and speculating and looking around him. Joe, you have more to add?
No, that was, I just picked that out because it's what hit me tonight, but there's so much in there. You know, Chrysostomus, I think, isn't that the first instance? Forget Bill if you're in earshot, Bill, Chrysostomus, Christos, the gold, and stomos, the mouth, golden mouth, that's internal monologue. I believe the first instance of it.
Isn't there a Saint John Chrysostomus?
Yes, he's a saint of the Eastern Orthodox, but it's also what's his name, Buck Mulligan's and teeth, golden teeth in his mouth. You know, he's got golden fillings, and it's also it hits in three ways. The other way well, since Bill's not here, I can say it. It's in the ancient world, it was common to refer to poets as having golden mouths and golden tongues, and you know, so the poet Virgil is supposed to have, a bee, and his nurse saw a bee inside his mouth, and the bee left the honey behind. You see, and that's what made him so sort of beautiful writer. Those kind of thoughts, and he's looking at Buck Mulligan and saying, yeah, he's feeling this sense that Buck Mulligan is also a writer, and he's I fear his lancet as he fears mine. I love the story about when Joyce came back from France. He didn't want to meet. I'm wandering now between the two characters, but Oliver St. John Gogarty, he didn't want to meet who is Buck Mulligan. He didn't want to. He didn't want to. I mean, he's getting off the mailboat. Funny enough, first person he saw was Oliver St. John Gogarty, and he was convinced that the word had got round that he was coming back, and Gogarty was coming out here to mess him. But Gogarty was out there by accident to meet someone else. There we go.
Oh, that's
The lancet that's been referred to is actually the surgical knife, though, in Gogarty's case, right? That Gogarty is worried about Joyce's sharp words, or Dedalus's sharp words, and Dedalus is worried about the actual surgical knife and medical terms that Gogarty throws around.
Yeah, Gogarty also writes, though. Like he does a group that reads Gogarty, a sort of subgroup of Ulysses readers. I've never attended it, but I attend another reading with them, and they once a year they read something by Gogarty. So he definitely, like, no one's anything published at this stage, but they're all working on something. At least in their heads.
I think if Joyce hadn't written this, no one would remember Gogarty. It's certainly not for his literature, that's for sure.
Yeah,
I've read his books, and they're interesting, but most of them are tangentially related to Joyce. As I was walking down Sackville Street, those things there. So he's sort of feeding off of even after Joyce's death, Gogarty's still using him the way he always used him.
Gogarty I'm working from my head memory, which can be fun, but he was awarded the gold medal in 1954, which I actually possess, from the American Poetry Society, or whatever the name was, and it came about actually. I mean, his poetry is very ordinary.
Yeah.
And yet he gets this great award of a golden medal. And I have a photograph of him being presented with it and everything. And it came about because Yeats was, the story, Bill, was the person making the selections and suggestions. Right. And as a result of that, he made this mad suggestion that Gogarty should get the award, and he got it. And he famously said, correct me, Bill, if I've got it the wrong way around. He said, "Well, I've been Joycified, and now I've been Yeatsified." Again, the crucified image, that he floats on Joyce, and now he's got this award because of Yeats.
It's probably totally unfair of me, but during the actual reading today, I was thinking that Gogarty would be a good writer of sitcoms, situation comedies, TV, because those are also they're generally mocking and mockish types of so
in a way, the ballad of joking Jesus, which is Gogarty, it gets read because Joyce puts it into Ulysses.
To me, it's closer to Alan Sherman, or in more modern times, Weird Al Yankovic. I mean, he's just a parodist. That's all he is. And so that in and of itself, it's not particularly creative because they had nothing to do with the original work, the creation, which is in many cases much better. Parody is just a joke. It's just a takeoff on that. And that's all that Gogarty is capable of, or Mulligan, I should say.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because Mulligan, we better stick with the names in the novel. Not wander into factuals. So,
well, our comments are evidence of Joyce's revenge.
yeah. And you have the milk lady, of course, Jean Van Vogt or Roisin Dove, the Irish people. You know, there was a time in Ireland when you were not allowed to mention Ireland by name, and so people devised all sorts of names, like the poor old woman. That's the Jean Van Vogt. Or Dark Rosaline, Roisin Dove.
Kathleen Nahulahan.
Kathleen Nahula, yeah. And that was the way. And well, she is Ireland, and she's coming up the ladder. Like in the Wordsworth edition, she on the page on the left, she's coming up with the milk, and the boys are still talking among themselves. It takes her a whole page to come up, and then she's in the room, and none of them have the slightest bit of manners towards her to go over and help her up or anything like that. And she represents the Ireland that these guys, don't really care for, that sort of thing. You get, and she's saying, "Sure, speak Irish. We all speak Irish here," very. And she would also represent Euryclea. I'm sorry, Bill. In your earplugs, she would represent Euryclea in the Telemachus episode of the Odyssey, who was the nursemaid of Odysseus. So there's the milk, you see. So you get these lightly sketched things in there. But you can go on and on and on. It's all nice. Just talk about it. You just, every time you read, you discover a few more things.
Well, this is why we reread it and reread it and we reread it, so we don't have to solve all the mysteries or even mention them at any one time. Any questions that anybody has? Any comments anybody like to make before we wind up today and look forward to next week?
No, great.
Okay. Once again, a reminder, on Monday in the Monday Book Club, we will be reading the Christmas Dinner from Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. And of course, next Thursday, we will continue with Nestor. And with that,
has any decision been made about the Monday group next book?
After we do this coming Monday?
Yeah.
Our tentative decision was, if no one came up with another idea, that we would be selecting one or two of the Dubliner stories, that we would use Dubliners as a bridge until we come up with a.
Yeah, I like that idea.
So if any of you have something that you think would be good for us to read at the Monday Book Club, let's talk about that on Monday as well.
Well, one thing to think about, I think we did mention it a few meetings ago, might be the Taun.
Oh, okay.
Or some of the other stories of the Ulster cycle of Finn McCool and things like that. Just to, as they're tangentially related to Finnegan's Wake and other things. Anyway.
Okay, well that sounds good too. I mean, I have a copy of the Taun, and I assume that there's probably an online version as well.
How do you spell the Taun?
Tain, Tafada-in, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Gloria once again is inviting anyone to join us for the Brazilian reading. And there is a PDF copy of Ulysses in Brazil, in Portuguese available. So you don't have to purchase a physical copy if you don't want to. Okay.
Excellent.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
It was a great reading.